Please welcome, we are thrilled to have for the very first time on the Transform stage, Maria Bartiromo.
Thank you so much, John.
Great to see you.
My hands are
Take
wet,
care.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much. We have a fantastic panel with us today, and it is wonderful to be with you here in Rochester. Let me introduce our panel. Paul Jacobs is CEO of Qualcomm. Roy Beveridge is Chief Medical Officer of Humana, and Larry Keeley is Director of Deloitte, co-founder and CEO, Doblin. Gentlemen, thank you for spending the time. Such an interesting and important summit that we are all attending today. It seems to me that some of the things that we heard yesterday as well as this morning fall into two categories, and that is, on the one hand, innovation and the amazing things that are happening in healthcare as a result of technology. And the second umbrella is, of course, cost, which is something that we have been talking about for a long time in getting the price down. Dr. Beveridge, let me kick it off with you. Talk to us about the cost of healthcare and what kind of progress we've seen in terms of ramping down the numbers.
So I think everyone in this room recognizes that costs are unsustainable. We've heard about that this morning and yesterday. There are some estimates that within 10 years, the average family will not be able to afford their premium for care. And this is in part, I believe, due to a very fragmented system, a system with expectations that may not be met. So I think this will be our most serious issue as a country to understand in the next number of years.
And one by one, the actual individual, the patient, the person is feeling the impact of that. Over the weekend, we saw news that more large companies are making adjustments in terms of the impact on them. IBM moving retirees off healthcare coverage, Time Warner, the same thing. Larry, what has been the impact, and what do you expect to be the impact on business as a result of what's happening with the cost?
For any individual business, Maria, the critical issue is to try to figure out how to get their model to even work. At the larger, more macro issue, if we don't reinvent the economics of healthcare, we change the lifestyle of Americans, we change the expectations of the country, we change the sense that we're the opportunity society, the place to go to get the future to show up just slightly ahead of its regularly scheduled arrival. The stakes couldn't be higher.
Yeah. And one of the ways, certainly, business has adjusted and the industry has adjusted is technology. Paul, you're sort of an out-of-the-box speaker here at the healthcare conference, because for a long time, your company has really benefited and ridden the wave of devices. We all have our iPhones and our BlackBerries or whatever devices of your choice. Your company makes the chips that go into those devices, but you're increasingly turning your attention to healthcare. How so?
Well, mobile is probably the biggest technology platform humanity's created. And there's 6.6 billion people, or 6.6 billion connections out there. We sold 1.7 billion devices last year. It is all over the world. So now you have this connected platform, and we believe that the next stage in what we're going to do with our devices is actually interact with ourselves and with the world around us. So healthcare is a very natural place for the phone to go make a difference and to allow you to be connected to your healthcare provider, to your family, your caregivers in your family, to your insurers if that's important. And we're doing all sorts of interesting projects there, which will drive costs as well. Inside Qualcomm, we're doing a project with Apollo in India, where we have many engineers who come from India. They moved to San Diego, where we're based, but they're responsible for the health care of their parents. And by the way, the company is paying for that health care as well. And so we give them devices that monitor their health, monitor their activity levels. And that data gets sent to the kid in the United States, and they know, is that parent, do they need to do something for their parent? Do they need to intervene? And that kind of more real-time opportunity, that allows us to lower our costs, allows the kids peace of mind, and so forth. But there's lots of other areas. I mean, when you look at emerging markets, we're doing a project in Egypt right now where you use the cell phone camera, take picture of if you have a skin condition. Take a picture, send it to the doctor diagnoses it, tells you where to go get the treatment, you go do that. Another thing going on in India, the cell phone providers with their call centers are able to actually provide health care. So a physical exam that used to cost $10 now costs $1 because it's done over the phone using the infrastructure of the cellular operator. And we see technologies moving forward. There's things like smart watches that are coming out now and give me the ability to be interrupted and alerted when something goes on with my health. If I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor and my glucose levels go up or down, it can come right here. I get it, get the notification right away. So we see this opportunity in the future for more sensors on our bodies, more sensors in the environment around us, interacting with the device that we carry, more opportunities for new products, new chips, also new technologies, new services, new revenue streams.
I love it, love it. How many people in the audience have a mobile phone?
How many don't?
That's better. How many don't?
Yeah, I don't see anyone.
How many people in the
Thank
audience
you.
have a PC? Okay, I think what you said was really critical. 6.6 billion mobile phones in the world today, and we should point out the number of PCs, about a billion. A billion PCs in the world today versus 6.6 billion mobile phones. Right there, that tells you about the growth.
There's a related point, Maria. It's about velocity of that transformation. Paul and his team at Qualcomm have helped to create not only the most impressively functionally elegant technologies in the history of the world, but flush toilets have been around for about 400 years. Cell phones have been around since the early 1980s. And to see that we have vastly more people with access to cell phones than we do have access to functional plumbing gives you a sense of the velocity of the transformation.
Yeah, we always use the stat, actually, more people have cell phones than toothbrushes. And if you think about it, if you don't have a toothbrush, it's probably good you have a cell phone.
Very good, very good. Well, I think what you're hitting on is the population growth happening outside the United States.
Yeah.
And the population growth happening outside the United States, in places like India and Indonesia, et cetera. That's where the growth is in the world today in terms of people, and that's ultimately where healthcare will be targeting.
And also, you think of these as underdeveloped markets, but if you look at the stats on, for example, mobile broadband, 2.2 billion people have a 3G or a 4G connection. Half of those are in markets that we would call emerging markets already. And when you look at the growth of smartphones, more smartphones will get sold into so-called emerging markets over the next 5 years than into the developed markets.
So I'm going to push back a little bit and say that the emerging markets are where we need to spend a lot of time. But if you look within our own country, we have tremendous deficits in terms of technology and interoperability. So a lot of the stuff that's going on in India and in Egypt, as you said, is equally applicable in Mississippi and a lot of other places within our own country.
No, I agree with that. I think, some of the reason why this happens in the emerging markets is because the regulatory burden is lower. So they're just able to roll the things out faster. We can trial them, find out what works, what doesn't work, and then I think what happens is that stuff kind of boomerangs back into the developed markets. We saw that actually on the chipset side. We invested heavily to drive the cost down for the lowest end phones in India. That chip became so cheap that actually was able to come back and be used for what we call machine to machine. So the things are talking to each other and you have to have them cheaper and cheaper. And so some of the healthcare devices are actually powered by a low-end chip that came from a development for a $16 phone in India. So you get this boomerang effect that's quite fascinating.
You know, I want to get back to the boomerang effect and the fact that today we can do so much more in terms of monitoring, and that has to be helping business. But I'm going to get back to that in a moment. Let's stay on regulatory for a moment, because it seems that the regulatory story is front and center, obviously in healthcare, but so many other industries. Is this, in some cases, holding back innovation in any way in this country, or holding back improvement and advancement? What can be done?
Gee, I think it's a real bulletin that regulations might somehow or other interfere with innovation and experimentation and trying new things. Some Republicans, I've noticed, sometimes make that point. But the thing that I think is really interesting is to understand that inside of the regulatory surround, no country is doing more to try new things than this one. I mean, I love T.R. Reid. I love his insights. He makes the very elegant point in his book that there are 4 healthcare systems in the world and a 5th one called no system at all, and the U.S. is the only place that uses all 5. And what's interesting about that is that in the choice of any one system, if the politicians all got aligned, what we would lose, Maria, is the opportunity to create as much innovation and as much diversification and as much experimentation as we see here and nowhere else. And that's the thing that I think we shouldn't lose sight of, is somewhere in this $3 trillion healthcare economy in the United States of America lives the disproportionate, sort of focus on innovation that powers advances everywhere in the world. And it really doesn't matter if we're doing it in India with your cheap chips, or if we're doing it through Paul Farmer in Partners in Health in Haiti, or we're doing it at the Mayo Clinic or at Kaiser Permanente. Learning what the mechanisms are in business models to create those advances is one of the burdens we have as we try to figure out how to get progress to happen faster and smarter and everywhere.
So if you look at, say, oncology, and you look at where the improvements for care and methodologies and treatment have occurred, they've really largely focused in on the United States. And there's a relationship, as we talked about earlier, in terms of the higher cost, so that there is an incentive for this excitement, for this changes of choice. So cost and I think this inventiveness are related.
It's a very important point, because you could talk about other healthcare systems where it's much cheaper. But when you're really looking at innovation, it doesn't matter if it's much cheaper somewhere else. The innovation is beginning here. Even though I know there is real innovation happening, we cannot take this for granted, because there's real innovation happening as we speak in China, in many other emerging markets as well, right?
No, I absolutely believe that there's a lot of innovation going on in areas outside the United States. And we do have the system set up that encourages innovation. We have the great research university, we have all that, but we have a lot of policies that the government has that really discourage it too, like money that's earned offshore doesn't come back for R&D. We don't allow the best and the brightest to stay here after they get their degrees. We send them home to create critical mass in other areas. So I mean, it's not something we can take for granted at all. I would say on the regulatory side, I mean, one hopeful sign is that we do see some movement happening. On the reimbursement side, there's now these things where you can do trials, and if you can prove cost savings, then you can get reimbursements done without an act of Congress. We've done this Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize, so when I talk to audiences of engineers, they know what a tricorder is. Does everybody know the tricorder from Star Trek? It's the little box that they waved over you to see what disease the person had or what was wrong with them. And anyway, so we're doing a $10 million prize to create one of these things in real life. The FDA just joined as a partner in that. That's, to me, a very hopeful sign that they're willing to look at something that's sort of so out of the box and so science fiction-y, but by the way, which I think is going to, I think this prize is going to be won in the next 3.5 years, so it will happen. But it's good. there's movement. Just a question, is the movement fast enough, and will innovation happen in these other markets even faster?
Let's talk about innovation and really dig in here. I want to get to what you've announced recently, your smartwatch, and where you see that going in a moment. But from your standpoint, Roy, at Humana, where do you see the innovation from where you sit?
So we're very fortunate in that we're in every state in the union. We are working with any number of health systems and partners. We see an immense number of opportunities. If I look back 5 years ago, I cannot imagine 5 years ago what there is in today's world. And I have great difficulty seeing what's going to be in existence 5 years from now. I think that our approach at Humana is to take multiple shots on goal. I'm not sure we know exactly what's going to work in 3 to 5 years. I think it'll be a combination of technology. I think it'll be a combination of hands-on caring, which I think every clinician in this room recognizes is fundamentally important. It will relate to the healthcare system and how payment structures are made. So I think it's going to be very, very complicated. I'm not sure I know in 5 years what it's going to look like, but innovation will certainly be part of it. Very sophisticated watches will be incorporated, but it'll be a component of a much broader approach.
Larry, what about you?
Well, one of the things that I try to do, first off, I totally appreciate Roy's a brilliant man bringing humility to the question of what's going to happen around the corner. Seeing around corners is always hard, right? But one of the things that you can do to try to make sense of innovation is to look at the big vectors of change. What are the themes that are just getting more important over time? And I see 4 in the healthcare space that really are inexorable trends, Maria. One is that we're just systematically getting smarter. We're getting deeper. So that is to say, for every one of the most costly care conditions, we know more and more about how to get it to be managed for better outcomes. We're starting to do things everywhere instead of just one place where you have to go to the doctor. And
delivery.
Exactly, the delivery is a revolution. And we're starting to make it individualized and personal rather than just formulaic and hoping for the best. And those 4 big vectors of change have each of them a plethora of really exciting innovations underneath them. Sometimes technical innovations, sometimes business model innovations, sometimes process or quality revolutions. But the thing that's sort of really helpful is to snap it into focus and say, what are the big vectors that are just getting better over time?
So one of the things that we've done at Humana is we all recognize that the system is very fragmented. And for the physician who's sitting in his or her office seeing a patient, they're not aware of whether the patient frequently was in the emergency room, if they had surgery, what was the surgery, what was the follow-up. We're still in such a primitive manner in the care of most of our patients that we frequently don't have drug reconciliation. We don't know what drugs the patient was on when they were discharged from the hospital, or if they went to see the dermatologist, what they were placed on. And so one of the technologies that I think is very exciting and is going to continue to be ever increasingly important is we bought a company called Envita. And what Envita does is it looks at the entire patient experience. So it looks at each hospitalization. It looks at what medicines were prescribed. It looks at the laboratories. It has all of this information so that, to your point, it makes the individual physician that much smarter. They see the patient, they can get a very powerful overview, and that's where the technology comes. And so you have to have that personalized ability for the physician to care for the patient, but you need to arm them with this vast array of complex technology, but then our very smart technology people have to make it simple enough that the physician can see the patient in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, get the understanding, and then apply what has to happen, which allows, to your point also, the personalization of care. Exactly. So we've got this immense amount of data, but it's got to be personalized to Mrs. Smith or to Mr. Jones, so that it's working for them, for their issues.
Which is what Watson is trying to do.
Yeah, Watson, for those that may not be familiar with it, and this is a savvy audience, almost everybody is trying to codify the knowledge that a physician has to master in his or her very costly training. And the thing that's exciting about Watson is IBM, for the moment, has been smart enough to say, we're going to make it an aid to the physician. So standing in the relatively near future, a busy doctor driving herself to work today might be able to see in a heads-up display inside of her automobile, gee, doc, you're going to see 17 patients today. We think the diagnostics for 14 of them is fundamentally correct, but these 3 really need a second look. Take extra time with these 3 because the conditions are complicated. To your point about distributed care and the way business models behave in different regions, once Watson exists and functions well for doctors at the Mayo Clinic or Humana, it also can be enormously helpful for a nurse practitioner in sub-Saharan Africa who's trying to deal with a condition that she can't tell whether or not it's, Ebola or just a really early on case of a nasty flu. And it's a pretty important thing to be able to codify that knowledge and then radically lower the economics of accessing a doctor's expertise.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're doing with the XPRIZE is it is actually a competition between the machine and a panel of doctors.
Love that.
So the competition is, here's 15 disease states. This little device, this 5-pound device, has to be equal to or better than the panel of doctors in diagnosing these diseases. And I think it's going to win. I mean, I think the device will win because it'll have all of that access to the information plus a set of sensors that are going to be built into it, and just a huge amount of computing power that gets done right in your hand.
Of course, if he has his way of a heads-up display so that I'm driving into work and I see that I've got 27 patients scheduled, I may just drive off the road.
Which is a very good idea.
So I really hope that you get some physicians to help you in the design of this process. Okay?
Well, plus Toyota's already, and others have already got lane keep assist and a sort of monitor to determine when your head is wagging too much. So I think there may be other layered technologies that sort of help you from
driving off the road?
Yeah, and just specifically turning around and going back home, climbing into bed and pulling the covers over your head. But Maria, one of the things that I think we should all note is that we're describing a world where climbing the confusion curve and the complexity curve happens for years and years and years before we finally learn to come down the other side and make those complicated things simple and elegant. To a very large extent, the articulated mission that we're hinting at is the notion of complex integrated platforms that make it really easy to do hard things. Right? So we all now love our ability to get the software we care about inside of iTunes Store. We used to call it the music store, but now it's music and comedy shows and professors' lectures and podcasts and everything else. And the exact same thing will happen as we learn to create integrated ecosystems that do really hard things in elegant ways.
Really fascinating stuff. Now you have to, as the CEO of a technology company, you have to look out 5 years and try to anticipate what we will want, what will be the demand stories. So talk to us a bit about that. And then I want to go into what you've announced in your smartwatch and why this is so compelling.
So a new radio technology that we come up with takes 8 years from when we come up with the idea to it first showing up in a device. It has to go through the development process, the standardization process, the commercialization process. So we're absolutely looking that far out ahead to try and decide what it is people want. And we run the company by a series of visions. And the one that we were working on before this was just that the phone was going to be the center of entertainment and computing and productivity as well as communications. And that's why Qualcomm's in the position we're in right now, because we made those bets, we drove that market to be where it is, and now we're benefiting from it. So the vision that we're working on right now, we call it digital sixth sense, which is the notion that the world around us is going to have a bunch of sensors, services. You'll walk into a location, things will be offered to you, whether it's the fact that I might be able to use a projector, a screen that's in the environment, or I get into my car tells me here are the things that you can interact with the car with. My phone tells the car, it's Paul Jacobs, here's his preferences, here's his content that he wants to be able to play. My friend gets in the car, it interacts with them so that they can now use the microphone and the speakers and so forth. So this notion that the world will be a much more interactive place, and when you walk in, content will be available to you. I just came back from, I was telling you the Basketball Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony, and the reason why I was there was because they want to take their museum from being a static place where you see exhibits on the walls. We have technology now. When you walk up to the exhibit, it actually knows you're there. It will push something to your phone, give you a notification in real time, and the opportunity now to interact more fully with that environment. And the cost of doing that is very, very low. It's very cheap technology because everybody's carrying these smartphones around with them. So now you assume that you have the smartphone and you use that technology, the screens, the sensors, the camera, the processing power, the connectivity, all of those things that you have with you, and now you say, okay, what experience can you make? And to go to your point about personalization and simplification, I mean, these devices are incredibly personal to us. We've done a lot to hide complexity of it. But if you imagine a world in the future where you're getting notifications of stuff all the time, whether it's because my glucometer told me something, or because I walked into Starbucks and they wanted to offer me something, if I'm pulling my phone out, and we pull our phones out on average 150 times a day already. And some of you have to unlock it, like I have to unlock my phone, so it's just, it's time. If I'm going to start getting lots of notifications now, how's that time? It's going to take up my whole day if I have to do that. So what we've been doing with the smartwatch idea is, how do you get notifications very simply? This thing's strapped my wrist. I know I'm not going to walk away, put it on the table and walk away from it. So the lock screen doesn't really have to be there. Now I get something coming up to me, I just go like that, I look at it. I don't have to turn it on, the screen's always on. I see something, I just swipe it away. If it's a bunch of things, it's as if there's a set of cards, I just swipe. And that, I think, is going to be the model for the future, that our devices are going to be interacting with us continuously, but done in a very simple way. And I'll give you another example of a thing that we're doing. So we're working on headphones that are very lightweight, that you can wear all the time. And so you may have in the future that you will walk into environments and it will whisper in your ear, this is, it's Maria, and the last time you saw her was this, and here's a little information just to remind you, and right? We all want that, don't we?
Well,
and as we get older, we need it.
At some point, this discussion has to go toward how much information is too much information and the privacy issue. So we'll get there, because that's a very important component of all of this, we all know, and I want to certainly talk about privacy. But in terms of, go ahead, Roy, you want to jump in?
So I was going to say that what you say is so important, because when you're asking, what do I see happening in 5 years? I'm saying it's multiple shots on goal, absolutely. I don't know what technologies are going to work, but what I do know, and what the last speaker talked about also, was that care is going to be given much, much more in the home for a variety of reasons. All patient surveys say that's where they want care. That's where they are spending 99% of their time. They come to see us physicians for 15 minutes 4 times a year or whatever it is. Well, the rest of their time, they're at home. That's where their life is. That's where their medical care is. That's where their health is. And the other important point is that having care rendered at home is a lot less expensive. And so these technologies, whatever they may be, are going to be hooked into the monitoring of people at home, which will be then linked into the electronic health record. And it's got to be in a way that doesn't overload the physician. And if you speak to practicing physicians, what they'll say is, on electronic health record, one of their biggest problems is alert overload. If I get 30 alerts in a day, that physicians just stop thinking about it. And that's not what we want.
Right.
So we have to have very smart systems that are running in the background, taking care of most of these events, and then distributing the workload, not just to the physicians, but to the team. And so the other thing, which I think is very important to understand in the next 5 years, is not only will things be done at home, but the team will be taking care of the patient. And as to the previous conversation, is not dumbing down medical care, it's distributing it in a wide variety to make a number of people responsible.
Because there is a physician shortage, by the way.
Well, it's not just a physician shortage. Lots of surveys show that patients actually sometimes quite prefer talking to their nurses about particular things, talk about nurse practitioners to medical assistants. Everything does not have to be blocked at one choke point with the physician. We've got to open that chokehold up because A, it's more efficient, B, with the graying of our population, we're going to need that to be expanded, regardless of the number of physicians, because even if we have enough physicians, there'll still be problems in terms of the distribution of physicians in this country, specialty, non-specialty, et cetera.
When you say home, you mean just not in the hospital?
I mean not in the office, not in the hospital. I mean where people live, their apartment, their residence.
But also, I mean, I think healthcare is going to be delivered when they're out and about too.
I agree.
We
Mobility.
we built a system. Our one product in the healthcare area is it's a hub that medical devices talk to, and the first product was actually a thing you plugged in the wall, and you just send it home with the person, and so it's automatically paired up, and it's really simple, and data gets uploaded into databases, and then if they allow it, mashups can happen, and information can get transferred to different members of the team. But we actually just announced porting that same capability onto the phone, because now people will have these wearable sensors and whatever it is, and they'll walk around and they'll actually get their health care. And I think that, particularly in treatment of chronic conditions, I think that's going to be
I'm sorry, by home I mean not the hospital, not in the,
that's what I thought.
It's life.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I thought.
And Larry, your Doblin developed systems that are enabling all of this information out there as well.
Well, we work with some of the greatest clients in the world to develop those systems. Deloitte also has Deloitte Digital, which is very, very good at delivering these kinds of integrated care revolutions. But the thing that I think is important here is the recognition, Maria, that the business models are so complicated and layered that one has to look for the new ways to create value, even if it starts in a surprising place, and even if the vector of learning moves in a non-traditional direction, right? So, and I think that all well-run enterprises these days, most multi-billion-dollar companies are discovering that they have to be curious systematically about where things are moving faster or changing faster. And what really does, at least for me, become tonic is just that systematic curiosity. You have to ask, when in the course of human events have we ever seen a revolution of this scale? When in the course of human events has anything to the degree that we need, this level of ambition, ever occurred before? And what you discover is that there's a relatively small number of deep precursors that you can learn from, right? In the history of warfare, there's only been roughly 5 revolutions in military affairs about how we totally change how warfare is done. In the history of education, there's really only been about 3 revolutions in the way in which we teach people or master something.
There have been revolutions in education.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
That is
yeah,
very hard to
it's
believe.
one of the most
We're waiting for the
incurious
big one.
fields you could imagine.
happen.
But we are in the midst of a revolution in a transformational moment, which is what gave rise to Mayo Clinic's Transform conference 5 years ago. The Center for Innovation here at Mayo Clinic has been specifically put in business to reinvent the Mayo model of care for the 21st century, right? And so it's exciting to live in a time when people are being systematically curious and discovering that if you pay enough attention to the needs, and then you design the business model that suits your ability to address those needs, You've got to improve your pattern of progress and your velocity of progress. It's really interesting to see business models as something that you can transform, that you can decide to change, that you don't have to accept them as somehow or other ordained by God and never to be challenged by the likes of mere men and women. It's a really interesting thing to see it as. It's actually our job to figure out how to radically reinvent the economics of healthcare delivery.
So how do some of these sensors work, Paul? I mean, you mentioned the checking of glucose, your heart rate, obviously. What else? Blood pressure. What are some of the easy, low-hanging fruit that you think can be done with a wearable device?
Yeah, I mean, the easy things, because you have this thing in contact with your skin, there will be various sensors that are being developed. And in fact, as part of this X Prize competition, Nokia sponsored a sub-competition on sensors that's going off every single year. So fluid levels and respiration rate, there are very simple things that you can get, but there are some very complex things that are in the labs right now. We're doing some clinical trials, for example, on a sensor that was developed by a guy at Caltech that checks and it will detect biomarkers 2 weeks ahead of time, supposedly, that you're going to have a heart attack because the cells start dying and things start flowing through your bloodstream. So imagine if your phone rings 2 weeks ahead of time and says you better go to the doctor because you're going to have a heart attack. That's kind of cool. People would take that technology and be willing to have implantable technology for that.
So you're injecting a sensor,
very small sensor, into the bloodstream.
okay?
You can imagine the regulatory burden that will undertake. But anyway, so it's monitoring, and it's actually powered by light. So you interrogate it with light, and that powers it, and it modulates the light and sends back the information of what's going on. And it turns out that you can do things with cancer now. There's this project where take a drop of blood, put it through a microfluidic array over some electrodes, and you can precipitate out the free circulating DNA, which is the best predictor, I guess, right now for cancer, and you can see it in very early stage. So the drop of blood goes over this electrode, stuff sticks to the electrodes, and now you can sequence that and figure out what's going on, or you don't see anything there and you say, that's good. But in any case, so you can imagine these kinds of things. Drops of blood give you that kind of information. The idea that you'll have stuff maybe inside your body. I think for most people, if you're not in a acute or a chronic, if you're not sick in a certain way, I don't think you're going to put up with anything invasive. But if you have any concerns, you're very willing to put up with things that are invasive, and it's happening today. There's studies on pacemakers. The difference between a connected pacemaker and a non-connected pacemaker, connected pacemaker mortality rate is 50% better. It's because my theory is because you actually have somebody watching it when something starts to go wrong, as opposed to if they're not watching it, then you say, I might not feel okay, but it's probably okay, and then you don't go to the doctor and get it checked on. But
so as
speculation.
As a payer, Humana currently covers hundreds of thousands of people with Medicare Advantage, which means that we're responsible for the global care of this population. And most of the patients in Medicare Advantage are staying in the system for 7.7 years with Humana, which allows us to be looking at investing very early in the care of people and then reaping the benefits both for the patient, for the individual, and for the company, which aligns the economics. And these types of things are tremendously important. And I would submit that the sensors that would be life-changing for this population, the average age is about 75, would be if one could have a continuous glucose monitor read, given our phenomenal problem with obesity in this country and the dramatic increased number of diabetics, and then looking at activity monitors. So all that you're saying is going to be whiz-bang and spectacular in 5 years, but if we can get to some fairly specific and helpful monitors now,
Yeah.
It's going to be truly game-changing for so much of our population. And that's going to be the trick, and how do you hook that up in the home, life, as opposed to the hospital.
Yeah. So from a payer standpoint, costs come down.
So costs come down from a patient standpoint. When you think about the costs that we as society spend for diabetics in terms of diabetic retinopathy, so they become blind, the kidney diseases associated with this, the amputations and the life-changing events that occur, this ability to monitor people real time and help them learn how to adjust is going to be game-changing.
You know, it's fascinating. I wore a Dexcom monitor for a week, not because I'm diabetic, because I just wanted to see how my glucose levels go. And they were telling me that there aren't actually a lot of studies of normal people, continuous glucose monitoring of normal people. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating what
if you'd like, we could stick a needle in you every 30 seconds.
Well, that's why I didn't like it. I put this thing here, but it actually did have a needle that went in, under my skin. So the question is, can we build a very accurate, non-invasive version so that more people would be willing to use it? But for people who are diabetic, hey, you're probably willing to put that thing on.
Yep, absolutely.
So sometimes, Maria, it helps to have a little context about how innovations like this actually manifest in the world. We've all watched how our cars get smarter, right? But most people don't recognize that an average modern car now exceeds more than 10 million lines of code, has 28 times the processing power of a first-generation IBM PC, and is an amazing data environment while it drives. And it can do all kinds of things that we now sort of take for granted and that seem like magic, right?
And by the way, has almost no cybersecurity.
Exactly. But getting back to seeing the pattern, Arthur C. Clarke years ago used to say that a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think that's the kind of thing that you guys are alluding to. Now, how that manifests on a individual patient or individual person just in their life, or for our aging parents so that they can live the way they want to live in the homes that they enjoy without having to be moved to a full-time care environment. These are the things that are going to happen. Seeing it in an automobile allows us to see what happens when the environment is more constrained and when you can do it inside of a smaller set of regulatory challenges, which are still numerous. But we will see the exact same revolution happen as more and more processing power, more sensors, more integration, and more elegance is brought to the sort of evaluation of how somebody's doing and what they're trying to do and how that's changing over time.
And I would, to be fair, I've been talking a lot about the technology at the client side, but we fundamentally believe it's a system.
Right.
And we've actually been working in healthcare now for, I'd say, 9 years, really just learning most of the time. And the one product that we have that is a system approach actually came because we were going to medical device manufacturers trying to sell them a cellular radio to put in their devices. And it was actually a regulatory reason that it didn't work. The cellular radio moved too fast relative to the regulatory cycle for the medical device. So they said, look, just separate those and give us something that'll talk to whatever communications technology they have in the medical device, talks to this hub, and then it goes over cellular. But then the whole back-end system of having the database in the cloud that then, HIPAA compliant, all that other stuff. But if you agree that this data can get mashed up, then the data gets mashed up and we can do data analytics on it and deliver it. And we bought a company called Healthy Circles that sort of provides the information to different members of the care chain. And so we have the beginnings of these kinds of things. The question is, do we make it simple enough for the end user to use? I use Quicken as an analogy. You have a lot of these siloed systems now. And it's very similar to what happened. You used to have lots of bank accounts and credit cards and stuff like that, and Quicken came along and just connected all of them, and now you get a simple report on your finances. And I'm hopeful that one of our partners or some set of our partners will do that. It's not the thing that Qualcomm does. We're not the ones who deliver it to the end customer. We build the enabling technology, but I think that will happen. And there's enough companies that are focused on this now to
Mining
make
the
it
data,
happen.
mining the data.
Mining it
So
and-
that's where we are right now in terms of mining so much information. Let's talk about privacy for a minute here, because we all love the ease of technology, and then we get upset when that information that goes into all of the technology is used against us. Is there any way to protect our information, or has the horse left the station and there's just no privacy?
You know, on a technological side, there's always a cat and mouse game between the hackers and the people building the defensive systems. So then what you have to do then is just build systems that can be upgradable. And what's nice with cellular, always on systems, things that are connected, is that the upgrading can mostly happen in your downtime. Like the thing that always used to make me mad about my laptop was I'd get out of a plane, I'd open the laptop up in the taxi going to the hotel, and IT would have pushed a security update, and 45 minutes later I could read my first email. With the phone, it's just happening in the background, and there may be a little dialog box that says, is it okay to do this? But for the most part, it's very easy, and I get right to it. On the privacy side, if you're thinking about a world where all this information is coming at you and you might be interacting with it, you certainly don't want that happening in a very centralized fashion. So we actually are building radio technologies now that are very decentralized, and they're anonymized. So the way they work is they'll send out random codes that can only be correlated to you later on. If you agree that somebody can read this set of codes and know that it was Paul Jacobs, then they can send something to me. But it may be that I'll walk into a store, I'll receive something, I'll know that I'm in whatever it is, at the coffee shop, and I don't necessarily want to say it's Paul Jacobs. I'm not a loyal customer of theirs, but if they want to send me an offer for something, I'm willing to tell them I'm this kind of a person. Or I might just say, I hear that, I'm just going to dump that in the bit bucket, I don't even want to interact with you, and they have no idea I was there. So those are the kinds of technologies that we're building to try and preserve anonymity while still allowing you to interact the way that you've come to expect. Most of the systems today are done very centralized in the big cloud, and therefore there's a lot of analytics that get generated off of that, which I think now, post-Snowden, people are starting to worry even more about. So we were thinking about that a while ago and really trying to build systems to give you some privacy.
So Maria, I think you bring up a very important question. I would say that everyone in this audience knows that 10 years ago when BRCA1, BRCA2, the breast cancer genes were out there, one of the questions at that time was, we understand scientifically what this means. We're going to build upon that in the next number of years. And then the question that was posed by the social work community, the nursing community, the physician community was, how is this going to affect patients trying to get health insurance? How are we as a society going to deal with this information? And I would submit to this audience that our science and our technology moves infinitely faster than what our social understanding and protection enables us to deal with. So if a woman gets BRCA1 or BRCA2 right now, there are still many states where the information might be protected and might not be protected. She might get life insurance. She might not get life insurance.
She might not get that job.
She might not be rated in that particular way. And we as a society actually need, I think, to address that issue that you bring up. And I think we need to be aware, once again, that technology moves infinitely faster than we as society.
Thoughts?
Lots of smart people have said, privacy, get over it, which is a distressing philosophical development that I often hear technologists sort of saying is the imperative today. But what I see is already covered by Paul in a nice way. The ability to sort of say, I'm anonymous, but I want to know if you can reach past my anonymity around these conditions. What I think is easy to overlook, Maria, is really exciting, is what happens when at scale we start to get second order, third order, and fourth order effects of technologies. So for instance, not so very long ago, those of you using Google with street maps views may have noticed that the streets get colored red, yellow, or green. And this is the example of what happens when at scale we break privacy to a small extent. In the old days, 4 months ago, to get that data, you had to put somebody in a helicopter trying to figure out what the traffic conditions are. Now you just take a look at what is the average rate of movement on highways with or streets of any kind with people using Google Maps right now. And that allows you to infer the traffic congestion. So it's a really wonderful thing that happens in predictive analytics that comes because lots of people are using the same devices and tools. You get second order, third order, fourth order pieces of magic. And it's just so important for us not to lose sight of the system as well as the individual rights. You know, I mean, when will we see a world where we make as many advances in the global state of healthcare as we experience every day in one game called World of Warcraft? You know, at any given moment, there's 6 to 11 million young people playing the game globally. So we've spent over 50 billion hours collectively playing this game globally. And there are, and I'm not making this up, 20,000 advances in the state of play today compared to yesterday. And if in your guild you don't have somebody modeling the 20,000 advances in the state of play that happened yesterday in World of Warcraft, you're going to die a grisly death, right? And the thing that's sort of amazing is the world that you're building, Paul, and the world of delivery that you have to sort of govern, Roy, has to be systematically curious. How can we discover the brilliance, the wisdom that is more or less lost in the information, to borrow from T.S. Eliot and The Rock from a very long time ago, right? The ability to sort of say, yes, there are times when we want individual privacy, but the collective value of seeing the patterns and finding the wisdom in those patterns is a gift that will be transformational for all of healthcare in the coming next few years, very few.
And because of this, we're seeing investable opportunities, we're seeing an enormous amount of private money coming in, 23andMe, smaller companies popping up, and that's important given the fact that the reality is NIH funding is dropping, and we continue to face a tight marketplace.
We spent $4 billion on R&D last year. We'll spend maybe $5 billion this year. So there's a lot of opportunity to invest in all of these new technologies, and there's a lot of opportunity for other industries to take advantage of the kind of investment that's going into the 1.7 billion devices that got shipped as cell phones this year. So I think that's really, I feel like this platform, obviously I'm very biased, but I think this platform is just so widespread and so much power in it that if we don't take advantage of it for improving healthcare, for both outcomes and cost, shame on us.
It feels like as a technology guy, you're focused increasingly on healthcare, almost the same or perhaps more as the consumer part of, which of course was the revolution for the consumer in the last, 20,
well, let's put it
years.
this way. There's $6.5 trillion in spend in healthcare and $1.5 trillion spend in mobile, so I know where the money is.
That's the bottom line. We'll leave it there. Larry Keeley, Roy Beveridge, Paul Jacobs, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's great. I think he's going to come out, so before we get out, you want to... Thank you so much. Great.